Welcome to the general definition section. In this section, we will go over some of the most common terms used in cybersecurity. So let's dive in. First off, we have InfoSec, or information security. InfoSec is the practice of protecting information. This usually involves protecting, or at least reducing the risk of unauthorized access, disclosure, modification, corruption, or deletion of information. To make it more concrete, let's think of a few examples where InfoSec would be needed. First off, think of an application that contains your medical records. Only you and your doctor should be able to see those medical records. So, your data should be protected against unauthorized access. Another example would be your private messages and emails. We would definitely not want them to be leaked publicly on the internet. And finally, think of your bank account. That account should be protected against modification, corruption, or deletion. You wouldn't want to wake up with less money in your account or without an account altogether. Next, we have cybersecurity, also known as computer security or information technology security. Cybersecurity is part of InfoSec and is the practice of protecting IT systems against digital attacks. It basically means protecting computers, servers, mobile devices, electronic systems, networks, and data from malicious attacks. These attacks can have as purpose the theft or damage of electronic data, such as personal data, as well as software and hardware. Other common purposes are to disrupt and/or misdirect the services provided by IT systems. For example, attackers can target a bank and make online banking unavailable. Or, in another scenario, an attacker would misdirect us to a malicious website where we would be tricked into giving our credit details to hackers. In the previous slide, we learned that cybersecurity means protecting components such as data, software, and hardware that support information-related activities. In InfoSec, such a component is called an asset. Assets can be devices such as a PC, a server, or a smartphone. Assets can also be software, for example, a website, an online shop, an online banking app, a car infotainment system, an operating system such as Windows, Linux, or Mac, or just a regular application. Finally, assets can also be information, such as a database with customer information, emails, personal messages, and so on. Now that we learned what an asset is, let's have a look at vulnerability. A vulnerability is a weakness in an asset. Usually, an attacker uses one or more vulnerabilities to commit their attack. Some common vulnerability examples are using outdated software and libraries, bugs, and misconfigurations of IT systems. Next term is threat. In computer security, a threat is the potential negative action or event caused by exploiting a vulnerability. Threats can be intentional or unintentional. A few examples of intentional threats are malware, phishing, hackers, or even an employee that is angry with the company. For unintentional threats, some examples would be natural events such as an earthquake, a flood, or a hurricane, or a technical failure such as a hardware or software failure. Another term commonly used is attack. An attack is a deliberate assault on an IT system with malicious purpose. You might see some similarities between a threat and an attack, so let's compare them. An attack is a deliberate action against a target with the intention of doing harm, while a threat is the potential for the occurrence of an attack. Since an attack is a deliberate action, it's always intentional, while a threat can be intentional or unintentional. Last but not least, an attack is an attempt to cause damage, while a threat has the potential to cause damage. The final term that we'll discuss in this section is IT risk. IT risk is the potential that a given threat will exploit vulnerabilities of an asset and cause harm. The IT risk is basically a combination of impact and likelihood. To better understand the IT risk, let's have a look at an IT risk matrix. On the horizontal axis, we have the impact, which goes from negligible on the left side to severe on the right side. On the vertical axis, we have likelihood going from very unlikely at the bottom to very likely at the top. Let's take two scenarios to better understand risk. In this first scenario, we have a website which is hosted on multiple data centers. And for one of the data centers, there is a very small chance that an earthquake can happen in that area. Because of that, the likelihood of the threat is very unlikely. And since the website is hosted on multiple data centers, the impact is negligible. Even if one of the data center goes down, the website would still work. Based on the information, the risk is very low. For the second scenario, let's think of an online shop. Due to a bug, when you log in on the online shop, you have the rights of an admin, and you can access data from other customers. In this case, likelihood is very likely because all users have admin rights, and the impact is severe because everyone can access data of other customers. This results in a critical risk. Now that we have knowledge of the terms used in cybersecurity, let's use what we've learned in a couple of examples. In the first scenario, we have an online shop which contains private information such as contact details of customers. Besides that, we have Alice, the owner of the online shop, who uses insecure credentials, such as admin for username and password. And finally, we have Eve, the hacker, who tries to obtain private information using combinations of commonly known credentials. Let's map the terms used today to this scenario. First, we have the online shop, which is an asset. The database containing the details of the customers can also be considered an asset. Then, we have the vulnerability, which in this case is the use of insecure credentials. Next, the threat, which in this case is information disclosure by exploiting the vulnerability. And then we have the attack, which in this case is Eve's attempt to log in as administrator using common insecure credential combinations. Finally, we have the risk. As we discussed, risk is a combination of likelihood and impact. In this case, the likelihood is likely, since this is a simple attack, and the impact is severe, because private information would be leaked to Eve the hacker. This results in a critical risk. In our second scenario, we again have an online shop which contains private information such as contact details of customers. In this case, the online shop is hosted on an unpatched server. Besides that, we have Bob, a regular user just buying stuff online. On the other side, we have again Eve the hacker, who tries to obtain confidential information using vulnerabilities from the unpatched server. This might seem a bit abstract, so let's see a more concrete example. Let me introduce Heartbleed. Heartbleed was a bug in the OpenSSL library, in the Heartbeat implementation. The Heartbeat is used to check that the connection between the server and the client is still active. Due to improper input validation, this bug could result into leaking confidential information from the server. The bug was first introduced in 2012, but was only detected in April 2014. As of July 2019, over 90,000 devices were still vulnerable to Heartbleed. To better understand this, we have here an oversimplified example of how Heartbeat works and how Heartbleed works. From time to time, the client wants to check that the connection with the server is still open, and will send a message to the server and wait for a reply. On the left, we have the normal usage, in which the client would say something like, "Hey server, are you still there? Send me this 3-letter word back if you are there." And then it would give a 3-letter word such as cat. Then the server would reply with the message cat. Now the client knows that the connection with the server is still open. On the right, we have the malicious usage using the Heartbleed bug. Similarly to the normal usage, the malicious client would send a message to the server. The client would say something like, "Hey server, are you still there? Send me this 128-letter word back if you are there." And then it would just send a 3-letter word such as cat. Due to improper input validation, the server would send back the 3-letter word followed by 128 letters filled with whatever else is after that word in the memory of the server. The malicious client could get an answer such as cat followed by some secret key stored on the server or confidential information about users such as their credentials or personal details. Now that we have a concrete example with Heartbleed, we will update the second scenario. So, we have an online shop which is using OpenSSL version 1.0.1. This version of OpenSSL is vulnerable to Heartbleed. As we discussed previously, the online shop contains private information such as details of customers. Besides that, on the left side we have Bob, the regular user just buying stuff online, and on the right side we have Eve, the hacker, who tries to obtain the confidential information by exploiting Heartbleed. Once again, let's map the terms learned today to this scenario. First, we have the online shop, which is an asset. The database containing the details of the customer is also an asset. Next, let's see the vulnerability. In this case, is the usage of OpenSSL version 1.0.1. Then we have the threat, which is again information disclosure by exploiting the vulnerability, in this case Heartbleed. Now let's have a look at the attack, which in this case is Eve's attempt to obtain confidential information using Heartbleed. Finally, we'll have a look at the risk. And again, we will have a look first at likelihood, then the impact, and finally we will calculate the risk. In this case, the likelihood is likely, since this is a relatively simple attack, and the impact is severe, because private information would be leaked to Eve the hacker. Because of this, we have a critical risk. To recap, in this section we learned the definitions of InfoSec, cybersecurity, asset, vulnerability, threat, attack, IT risk, and how to map these terms to scenarios. With that, we conclude this section. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. See you soon in the next section.